The best coaches in the game, we really ain't playing. We regroup up in the Slack chat where the coaches debrief. We be piecing these puzzles, occupy the chunk of the pie. Ain't no lie when we hit the block, helmet's casket is top. You be seeing helmet after helmet, helmet after helmet. First place, second place, fifth place, eighth place, 12th place, 15, 16, 20. So many helmets, you got blurred vision, we got too many. Tick your check. Oh man, shit. They got us fucked up. Army, regroup. We pledge always to have that edge. We don't fire warning shots. Competition just drop. We locked and loaded before lock. Whatever the time, yeah. Do you even correlate?
Being the best requires a willingness to outwork your competition. There's always someone smarter, faster, sharper, more naturally gifted to come around.
Welcome back, DFS Army. This is your boy FantasyFling taking another look at the MME strategy of top DFS pros and our Milly Maker review of Week 7. So let's get right into it. So this is something I write up every week at dfsarmy.com. Follow me on Twitter at FantasyFling as I tweet this out when I write it up. We take a look back at what won, and really the reason why you want to look back at past slates, for those of you who aren't DFS Army subscribers and maybe are new to the channel, is because history tends to repeat itself. So we're trying to see what is working, and then specifically, what is working to take down that contest, but also what top DFS pros are doing each and every week, their strategy. So we can kind of start to see their moves each and every week and, try to mimic what they're doing, because obviously it works to be highly successful top DFS pro. So we'll take a look at that. But first, we're going to start off with Week 7 Milly Maker winner. So what we had was the chalk smashing. So this was one of the weeks where the chalk smash and the top lineup ended up over 250 points. It's been kind of up and down, but we were back over 250. So what we had was a Joe Burrow stack, with Jamar Chase and Hayden Hurst. So that was our primary stack. And then we had a secondary stack of Austin Eckler and Kenneth Walker in that game. And, it was really one of the games that went to the over as we were hoping it would. We thought it would. Seattle and the Los Angeles Chargers. And so between these two stacks, we had 5 players in about 157 points. And we were able to get a 3-player average of about 29 points, which is exactly why you stack in what you're looking for. You're looking to have that high player average so that you can average 27 plus points across 9 roster spots to be able to take down a large field GPP like the Milly Maker. So, what was crazy about this, though, too, is this is back-to-back weeks where we've seen a Burrow and Chase lineup take down the Milly Maker, which is now it's multiple times that it's happened in 2 consecutive years. So Burrow and Chase and Mixon last year as well were in the Milly Maker lineup several times. And this year they had a slow start to the season, but we could see that they've got things going and they are absolutely on fire. So what was also different about this lineup is we had 2 of the chalkiest running backs. Now, these weren't chalky running backs because extreme value hit the slate, as we often see. These were just chalky running backs because they were in great plays. So the 2 of these, Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs, were well over. Eckler was 21%, Jacobs was over 46%, and then we also had Kenneth Walker over 32%. So really 3 chalky running backs. And, one thing we noticed in this game, and, I made mention to this last week, as I was giving some of my Yahoo plays, specifically on like DraftKings, for example, it's okay to use 2 running backs in the same game. Because if one of them is a pass catcher, like with Eckler. So Eckler he got 12 targets. He's basically a wide receiver. That's like, if a wide receiver gets 12 targets, that's incredible. Well, Eckler's getting that many targets and he's carrying the ball. So, when you have a pass catching back, you could certainly play him in the same lineup like this game did with Kenneth Walker. Overall ownership for this lineup, really high. You have to go back to 2019 to find ownership this high. I believe, 1 week in 2020, we had 173% in the $100 Milly Maker, but the average in all of 2020 one was 121%. And right now, the seasonal average is 96%. So to see a lineup of 189% was certainly really high. Now, before this week, our seasonal average was 96%. So now we're at 111%. So it's been quite chalky, but still when you make your Milly Maker lineup in the domination station over at DFSarmy.com, that's something you could put a total salary cap of 110 to 120. It just really depends on the week. So as far as the top leverage plays, there really weren't many, right? Because you see Burrow 17%, Eckler 21%, Kenneth Walker 32%, Jamar Chase 15%, and then Josh Jacobs 46%, and then the Jets D just crazy 43%. So there weren't many, but you don't need to get different in a lot of places. So Hayden Hurst 8%, but he really didn't do a whole lot. So the top leverage plays being Mecole Hardman and Paris Campbell. And when the chalk smashes, obviously there are a couple ways to get different. So still, and every week you will find it. That said, the Chiefs game, there were some under-owned pieces. So Kelsey obviously was more owned, and then people were looking at MVS and Juju, and then Isaiah Pacheco last minute became named the starter. So some might have saw that as a leverage play. However, Mecole Hardman 2%. And specifically with the Chiefs, you have to take chances. And Miko, we've seen it from time to time. He's got a very low floor. He could score you less than 1 point in a lot of weeks, but he can also score you over 25 points. So him being 2% on, great leverage play. Paris Campbell, shout out to Statsational power rankings at DFSArmy.com. If you're a DFS Army subscriber, you have access to this. And this is something where you could see the projections every week, so you can play those sharp plays and you can look for leverage plays. If you're not a DFS Army subscriber, use code FantasyFling. Check out for 10% off a VIP subscription. But just for example, last week, StatStational had the Indy passing offense for over 300 passing yards. And, when a lot of people were going to be on Pittman and, lesser people will be on Alec Pierce, Alec Pierce still being a pretty good leverage play. Even less than that, we're going to be on Paris Campbell. So, he's had some pretty good games recently. So this was a great leverage play at 2% as well. Now, as far as pricing, this is something I've mentioned several times. Most weeks, you will not see a player at the running back or wide receiver position priced above 8K. However, there are the outliers, 2-3 slates a year when you do see it. And as I've said in the past, specifically when you find really good value, when there's, extreme value that hits a slate, that is when you are more likely to see an $8,000 player in the winning Milly Maker lineup, as it was when you have Paris Campbell almost 6xing his salary at 3,900, and then Mecole Hardman over 6x his salary. He was only 4,300. So if you can get players like this that absolutely smash their salary, that is when you can afford to pay for an Austin Eckler and a Jamar Chase. So it's something to keep in mind in regards to value. Most weeks you are going to see a player who is going to be, most players in the lineup are going to be between 5 to 7K, maybe even 7,500. Overall, I think it's a positive EV decision to kind of avoid the 8 to 9K players. But if you can build, it's all about lineup construction. If you could build a lineup with some really low price players who may be in a great game script, as Mecole Hardman was, as the Indy's passing offense was with Paris Campbell, that is when you could certainly afford to pay up for those players. And then last, ceiling. I'll say this. One of the benefits of playing a lot of chalk in tournaments is there are generally players that project very well, have high median scoring, like a Jacobs and Eckler. They have high median scoring with the ability to have a ceiling type game and take down a large field GPP. Now, when you have players like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, and Kenneth Walker. He's a rising star, and really he's underpriced for the talent we're seeing. And that's really because he's a rookie, so his price is probably going to continue to going up and up. But when you have 5 players like this, who could combine for 186 points, 37-point average, that 27-point average that you need to hit a 250-point target to win a large field GPP like the Milly Maker, much easier to do when you have a core of heavy hitters. So something to keep in mind when you are building that lineup. Does this lineup have a 250-point ceiling to win a large field GPP? If you look at it and it really doesn't, and it's a 200 or like a 210, you probably want to go somewhere else. So something to keep in mind. Now, next thing I want to do, take a look at is Roto Grinders. They are going to list the top DFS pros. And this is, kind of where we look at as far as the top DFS pros and their MME strategy. So if you go to Roto Grinders, you can see now I specifically focus on NFL because this is an NFL review. So I don't really care who's overall best and, MLB and NBA, because some guys are just better at other sports. Osimo, for example, he may be the top DFS pro in the world, but as you can see, as far as the NFL season, he is kind of nowhere near the top at the moment. At least not top 5, top 10. He's top 14. So we have the top 5 guys. We're going to go down the list here. Need Lunch Money, The Whistle Goes Woo, Chipotle Addict, Utica, and McLovin. So let's start with Need Lunch Money. So his top, now you're going to kind of see the theme of the day. Most of the top DFS pros, the top 5, they all had a bad day. None of them had a positive ROI as far as MME goes. More on that later. We did have the top pro did have a positive ROI day, but it was not an MME type day for that pro. So this was the top lineup for Need Lunch Money. He had Patrick Mahomes stack, MVS, and then brought it back with Kittle. So this was the game environment that we are obviously targeting, and for good reason, because Mahomes was going to be low owned, and he had pass catching options that were low owned, and there were bring back options that were low owned. And, this is a game specifically with Patrick Mahomes, and, the San Francisco side, they do have quite a few playmakers. So we're hoping this game hits the over, and it did. So I can certainly see why this game was targeted. Unfortunately, just the other pieces that were included in there didn't quite get there. And really, you needed to have Mahomes with McCall Hardman and not MBS. So this lineup scored 191 points and very low ownership considering the day when you have, you'll see the chalk smashing as it did with the winning lineup. But as far as user exposures, there was really a few games that were targeted. So this is, the Cincinnati and Atlanta game. This was a game certainly to target, but didn't have enough exposure to the right players for this to be a positive ROI day. Mixon, decent day, but not nearly good enough. Not tournament winning upside. 39% exposure. Drake London, 24% exposure. And really the problem with Drake London, he's cheap and all, is Mariota's just not throwing the ball enough, not nearly enough. He's running the ball entirely too much. His pass attempts are way too low. So, really having him stacked at this point is just kind of silly because you're just not going to get there. Running him naked is probably, more of a positive EV decision at this point. So Mariota, 17% exposure. This is a game that obviously you'll see was targeted pretty heavily. And then we had a couple other games that he targeted. So the Brady, the Tampa Bay, Carolina game, and for good reason, at least projection wise. So we thought that was going to go a lot better. So Chris Godwin, 27% exposure. And then Kate Otten, he was pretty big on Kate Otten, Brady, and Fournette. So Fournette, 24% exposure as well. Kate Otten, 23%. And Brady, 16%. So certainly had some exposure as well to the Oakland and Texan game. And this is something you will see with a lot of the pros, the top pros, top five, is they were pretty heavy on this game, trying to get a lot of exposure to Josh Jacobs, but also getting off of Josh Jacobs and some of the leverage plays in that game. Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Foster Moreau, Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins, Damian Pierce. So yeah, let's see. I believe Damian Pierce is up here. Nico Collins, 11%. Damian Pierce, 22%. Brandon Cooks, 18%. Hunter Renfrow, 18%. So this was kind of a theme of the day, as you'll see with some of these other MME pros. And then obviously Amon went out with concussion. There was some exposure to the Dallas game. Dalton Schultz, 12%. That was a sharp play. Dak was just a little rusty, and they really got there more with the ground game. And the touchdowns that he did get, they just didn't go to the heavy hitters. But Amon, 18%. Jamal Williams was Swift out, 10%. I certainly had exposure to him as well. Detroit just not the same outside of Detroit. Their offense, after starting the season really hot, has just not been the same at all. There's some exposure to the Seattle and Chargers game, and this is something you will see a lot too. Geno Smith, DK, 12, 14. So over the field on that. Devontae, as I mentioned. T. Higgins, 19%. Yeah, and then Kenneth Walker pretty much almost even with the field there. Josh Jacobs, under the fiddle on Josh Jacobs, but for the guy it's 46% on, that's still quite a bit. Now, let's take a look at the whistle. Currently the number 4 ranked DFS Pro for NFL. So negative day to, need lunch money, negative 2,300. The whistle goes woo, negative 2060. So just overall a bad day for our top DFS pros, but you kind of see something similar here where you have Mahomes, Juju, and that's good. They got there, really. This is the reason why the lineup certainly didn't win. But still a really good lineup, 211 points, 141% exposure, so higher than normal, but for this week, not high at all. But yeah, Mahomes, Juju, and then this was obviously brought back with Debo, and just Debo didn't do enough. And then Jacobs and Moreau, Jacobs absolutely smashed. Moreau, he didn't do enough. So that was the other secondary stack after the primary. And then we really just had Walker, Chase, Auten, and Tennessee as one-offs. Pretty good lineup. Now, one thing I want to take a look at here, and I actually tweeted this out yesterday, and this is something to think about. When you're looking at, let me see if I could pull this up here. As far as, let's do this by position. Let's go to wide receivers. Okay. So throughout the week last week, everyone was in on the Bengals. They projected really, really well their offense going against Atlanta's secondary. And with recency bias, a lot of people thought Jamar Chase is probably going to come in as on their own. Everyone's going to chase Jamar. So the top DFS outlets, DFS Army included, everyone was kind of like, well, the target share is actually quite similar. So maybe, and T. Higgins is cheaper. So this seems like a T. Higgins week. So T. Higgins got so much steam. He got so much hype throughout the week that Jamar Chase ended up actually being the leverage play because T. Higgins was higher owned. As you will see here, Jamar Chase, the field, 15%. T. Higgins, 18%. Pricing being higher or not, if we knew that T. Higgins was going to come in higher owned than Chase, of course we would go right back to the more talented Jamar Chase. So this is something to think about, each and every week. I think, there's obviously a lot to be said for trying to get leverage, but there seems to be this trend going on in the industry right now where, the industry's got so sharp that a lot of times the leverage plays don't actually end up being leverage plays. So it's kind of one of those things where maybe we should think about, actually playing the number one guy in that offense, or instead of playing the second guy in the offense, if everyone is recommending that guy, like in this point, Higgins, who was actually option B, maybe we should, instead of playing Higgins, we should have played Boyd, who was 3% owned in like the mini max, for example. Nobody was on him. He was only 5,300 and he scored 32 points. So it's just something to think about because this is a scenario I've seen play out over and over. And oftentimes the industry is just so sharp that maybe we should, instead of going to option B, maybe option A is going to be less chalky than we think. So we should actually go to option A in a scenario like that, or we should do option C, option D, whatever that may be. So as far as top exposures, and of course we will just go through all these exposures from the top. So the game that the whistle goes woo that was on the most was the Raiders and Texans game. So a lot of exposure to Hunter Renfrow, 18%, Brandon Cooks, 17%. Of course, Foster Moreau, 21%, Damian Pierce, 20%. So really this game, if you didn't have Jacobs, Jacobs was the guy to own. So these are leverage plays and they just didn't end up working out, but you can see the reasoning for this. And then the other part of that is Tyler Lockett. That's Seattle, Los Angeles Chargers game. So Tyler Lockett, 25%. Geno Smith, 19%. I believe there was some Noah Fant in there as well. Yeah, Noah Fant, 10%. So a lot of the same games that you're seeing a lot of these pros targeting. And, there's good reason for that. You got a lot of really high, really good playmakers like the DK Metcalfs of the world. And who knows what his day would have been like if he didn't get hurt. But you got a lot of really good playmakers who really are coming in pretty low relative to some of these other players in other games. 11% for a stud like DK Metcalf in a high projected game. You'll certainly take some shots there. Geno Smith, only 9% owned by the field, and he's been playing really good. And then obviously on the Bucs side, they just didn't get there. The offense just isn't right. It kind of makes you wonder, had Brady hit Evans at the beginning of that game for that touchdown, how different would their offense have looked? Would it change the dynamic of the game? Brady's stats certainly would have looked better with a 70-yard touchdown to start the game with Mike Evans. But yeah, Brady, 16%, K. Otton, 21%. And that was a sharp play with Cameron Braid out. Godwin, 26%. And then the Cincy game. So again, and this is one of the top DFS pros. And, while everyone was on Higgins, certainly took some chances on the other offensive players in that game. So Hayden Hurst, 16%, Joe Mixon, 16%. Obviously pretty high on Joe Burrow, 18%. Even on Higgins, even on Chase. So at least here with the Cincy game, there was exposure pretty much across the board. So it wasn't just 70%. And this is why this is one of the top DFS pros in the world, even though obviously this week wasn't a very good week. Now, Chipotle Addict, everybody knows Chipotle Addict. Let's take a look at Chipotle Addict next. Now, Chipotle Addict's top lineup. Kind of went crazy with the stack, right? Now, this is a lineup that there's a lot of goodness here. So, got the right game, you got the right players, the top two players with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Now, had T. Higgins not been used and Tyler Boyd been the play, we're talking about, a much better lineup here. And then specifically, if you're not forcing a bring back with Drake London in the Atlanta's just low volume passing offense, if you use that money to pay up at another position, the salary savings to pay up at another position in the flex spot, so where you're not really using a Hayden Hurst and Gerald Everett, just because typically, in my opinion, who am I to tell Chipotle Addict that he's making mistakes? But if you're gonna flex a tight end, you kind of want like a Kelsey or like Andrews or Kittle type, and then you want like a value tight end. So you're not having Hayden Hurst and Gerald Everett, but the MME pros, they tend to overstack games, just hoping that game, goes off completely because they have the bankroll for that to happen. Whereas, people with a less of a bankroll, you're just not going to see it, right? It's much easier to go broke playing, Drake London, Hayden Hurst, and Gerald Everett, for example, flexing two tight ends, kind of overstacking and doing a bring back with a Drake London in a low volume passing offense. But there were certainly some really good plays here. Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. Right here, these four basically carried the lineup. And if the rest of the lineup had really done anything, this could have certainly took down the Milly Maker. So you obviously see the reason why the stack was used, and at least is a way to get really different when you're using as Josh Jacobs, it's 46% owned, Kenneth Walker, 32% owned. So getting really different with Drake London, Hayden Hurst, and then the Denver D certainly kept the ownership much lower than, even the Milly Maker winner this week. So as far as exposures, kind of the same thing, even though that was the top lineup, that wasn't even the game Chipotle Addict had the most exposure to. Tyler Lockett, 44%, Geno Smith, 38%. So these are obviously, this Seattle and Chargers game was very heavy on it. DK Metcalf, 38%, Gerald Everett, 39%. And then, anytime you can get like a Derrick Henry at low ownership, he's 36% on. The field was 36% ownership, the field only 11%. You take that all day. And Derrick Henry had a great game. He didn't have a ceiling type game, but he had a great game. Zeke, this was a great play. Dallas's running offense projected very well. And, the only hesitation with something like this, where probably the exposure would have been almost double, is just, what are you going to do with the timeshare? Well, this coming, we're not have to worry about that because it looks like Zeke's going to miss a game on Pollard, probably be jammed in all lineups and be a free square. But nonetheless, some of these, the game that was targeted the most, obviously Chargers and Seattle, you could see both sides. So Gerald Everett, 39%, DeAndre Carter, 22%. And then the Houston and Las Vegas game. So Dameon Pierce, 26%. Josh Jacobs, 61%. So even way over the field. And Jacobs was 46% owned. So very highly owned. Didn't matter. Still way over the field. Hunter Renfrow, 13%. And then I believe we had some Foster Moreau as well, 16%. Nico Collins, even on Austin Eckler, but 21% exposure to Eckler in that Chargers and Seattle game. So that was obviously a game that Chipotle Addict was all over. And most of the touchdowns just didn't go where you needed them to go, right? So DK Metcalf gets hurt. Tyler Lockett, he was nursing a hamstring injury. Marquise Goodwin gets the touchdowns. So that's just how it goes. Everett didn't get the touchdowns. It was an Eckler. It was an Eckler, Marquise Goodwin, and Kenneth Walker day. So those were really the three players that you needed in that game. So moving along, going to go to the number 2 DFS player in the world, MME strategy, and then I have a surprise for you with the number 1 DFS player in the world. So Utica, number 2 DFS player. This is our MME strategy for the Milly Maker. We got Mahomes. We got Josh Jacobs. Or I'm sorry, Mahomes, as far as stacking, Mahomes, Juju, MBS, and brought back with Debo. So obviously, Juju got there. MBS didn't get there, not tournament winning upside, not horrible. And then Debo just really brought it down. But you also had a Godwin and Otten stack. And, the Bucks offense just didn't really do enough at all. They scored 3 points. So they didn't get there, obviously. But Jacobs, Walker were great plays. Overall, this lineup was 135% owned, 183 total points. So 183, pretty bad, obviously, for one of the top DFS pros in the world to do 150 lineups, and their top was 183. So won't spend too much time on this. As far as exposures go, it's pretty much the same across the board. We got Brandon Cooks, Devontae Adams. These are obviously leverage plays off of Josh Jacobs. DJ Moore, this is a sharp play. Obviously, they targeted DJ Moore a lot. They proved, he's still their guy after trading Christian McCaffrey. Foster Moreau in that same game with Houston and Las Vegas. Damian Pierce. So that was obviously a game that Utica was on a lot. And then this one too, as we saw, this is going to be a losing day when you target the Bucks passing offense and they do nothing. So Chris Godwin, Tom Brady, and I'm no stranger to that. I was one of those people. It sucked. It was a crappy day. It was tilting all day. That's just how it goes. But you know what makes me feel a little bit better? When I watch top DFS pros losing most of their money on, their MME strategy. So I look at this and I'm like, well, at least I'm not the only one that sucked. And then lastly, again, just targeting the wrong side of this game. So this was really one you didn't, if you were targeting the Cincy Atlanta game, you didn't want game stacks, right? You wanted team stacks. So Kyle Pitts, 14% exposure, Drake London, 12%. T. Higgins, 24%. And then I believe had 22% exposure to Mixon. Hayden Hurst as well, a little bit in there. A little under the field on Hayden Hurst. Joe Burrow, 10%. Jamar Chase, 8%. Not enough. Now, the last thing I want to look at here, and I tweeted this out a little bit earlier as I was looking at this, and the first time I looked at it, I didn't really think a whole lot of it. The second time I saw this is kind of interesting, to say the least. McLovin, as we see here, top DFS NFL pro in the world right now. This is the second time. Miss McLovin is normally an MME player. So you will see McLovin. I've covered him several times this year. 150 lineups in the Milly Maker. However, twice in the Milly Maker this year, McLovin has only put one lineup in and won $80 off of it twice. Now, when I first saw that, I was like, that's interesting, because it's the first time I was like, maybe, it was a mistake, didn't want to play. The Milly Maker is like, whatever, I'll just throw this lineup in. Second time this happened, you'll see, as we just went over, most of the top DFS pros in the world, they didn't just lose money, they lost a lot of money. So what this tells me, and by the way, this is basically a cash lineup that McLovin put in the Milly Maker. And the reason that it threw me off right away is I was like, this is Joe Burrow. No stack. There's no Chase. There's no Higgins. There's no Boyd. There's not even any Mixon. There's no Hurst. It's just literally Joe Burrow. So this is more or less a cash lineup that I played. I scored 194 points in my cash lineup, and I had Burrow, I had Jacobs, I had Walker, I had Lamb, I had Lockett. The difference for me is I had Hunter Renfrow, Greg Dulcich, Eckler, and the Jets D. So this is basically a cash lineup that was put into the Milly Maker, $180. So, it's a positive ROI of $60. Look at the total ownership, 209%. Scored 195 points. So what that tells me is a McLovin pretty much thought the plays this week were so obvious and they were so likely to smash that there wasn't much of an edge. So it wasn't even worth MMEing the Milly Maker. And it turned out to be correct because we just looked at all the top pros and they all lost over $2,000. So just goes to show why McLovin is number one in the world. And we'll keep an eye on this and see if it happens again. But really interesting, food for thought. Anyways, I hope you all learned a few things and appreciate the show. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And hopefully y'all win some money next week. We will see you next week.